Dad texted. On Christmas morning, my kids looked up at my mother and asked, "Where are our gifts?" She laughed sharply and said, "Santa doesn't bring presents to ungrateful children." Have you ever felt the temperature in a room drop 20 degrees? Not because a window was left open, but because a specific person walked through the door, sucking the warmth and oxygen out of the space with the sheer gravitational pull of their disapproval? That specific, suffocating chill is the sensory memory that defined every holiday of my childhood. A coldness that I foolishly thought I could insulate my own children from if I just played by the rules, if I just smiled enough, if I just pretended that the emotional landmines littering my parents' floor were actually decorations. I was wrong, of course, and the moment I realized just how wrong I was didn't happen in a courtroom or during a scream-filled argument, but on a silent, pristine Christmas morning, watching my 6-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter look up at their grandmother with eyes full of confusion and ask where their gifts were, only to hear a laugh that sounded like glass breaking in a disposal. To understand why my mother, a woman who meticulously curated an image of matriarchal benevolence for her church friends, would look at two innocent children and tell them that Santa doesn't visit ungrateful brats, you have to understand the currency of our family, which wasn't love or loyalty or even tradition, but compliance. I was the eldest son, the one who had tried to escape the orbit of her narcissism by moving 3 hours away and marrying a woman, Sarah, who refused to kiss the ring. And for that transgression, we had been placed on a probational status for years, a tenuous peace that existed only as long as we performed our roles as the grateful, scrapping subordinates to my parents' benevolent nobility. The setup for that disastrous Christmas began months earlier, in late October, when my father, a man who had long ago traded his spine for a quiet life, called me with a proposition that sounded more like a summons. We had been struggling that year. I had been laid off from my graphic design job in the summer and was freelancing to make ends meet, and Sarah was picking up extra shifts at the hospital, meaning our budget for the holidays was non-existent. My father knew this, of course, because my mother collected our misfortunes like trading cards to show off to her friends as proof of how much we needed her guidance. He told me that they wanted to host us for the full week of Christmas, that they knew we were having a tough time, and that they wanted to spoil the grandkids properly this year, implying that if we didn't come, the kids would suffer for our pride. It was a trap. I knew it in my gut, the kind of offer that comes with invisible strings thick enough to strangle you. But I looked at my son, Leo, who had been asking for a specific Lego set for 6 months, and my daughter, Mia, who was dreaming of a dollhouse we couldn't afford, and I swallowed my pride. I told him we would come. I told him we were grateful. I told him we would follow their schedule. I sold my soul for the promise of seeing my children smile, convincing myself that I could endure 5 days of passive-aggressive comments about my weight or my career if it meant my kids got the magic I couldn't provide. We arrived on the 23rd of December, driving up the long gravel driveway to the house I grew up in, a sprawling Victorian estate that always felt more like a museum than a home, the windows dark and imposing against the gray winter sky. The dread started the moment the car engine cut off, a physical tightening in my chest that made it hard to breathe, a regression to the scared little boy who used to hide in the pantry to avoid my mother's moods. Sarah squeezed my hand, a silent reminder that we were a team, that we were just visitors in this museum of dysfunction. But as we unloaded the bags, I could see the tension in her jaw too. My mother greeted us at the door, not with a hug, but with an inspection, her eyes raking over our clothes, our car, and even the kids' haircuts, looking for flaws she could file away for later use. She made a comment immediately about how tired Sarah looked, framing it as concern but delivering it with a smirk, implying that if Sarah managed her household better, she wouldn't be so exhausted. The kids, oblivious to the subtext, ran to hug her, and she stiffened, patting their heads with the same affection one might show a stray dog that had jumped on a clean sofa, before telling them to take their shoes off because she had just had the carpets professionally cleaned and didn't want outside dirt ruining her aesthetic. The next 2 days were a masterclass in psychological warfare, a slow, grinding escalation of small injustices that were designed to break us down before the main event. My mother had a rule that the house had to remain showroom ready at all times, which is an impossible standard for a house containing 2 small children, yet she enforced it with a terrifying vigilance. If Leo left a toy car on the rug, she would pick it up and place it on the high mantel, telling him that if he couldn't care for his things, he lost them. If Mia laughed too loudly, my mother would press a finger to her lips and hiss that ladies do not screech, shaming a 4-year-old for experiencing joy. My father sat in his leather armchair in the den, hiding behind a newspaper or the television, emerging only to refill his scotch or to nod in agreement with whatever edict my mother had just issued. He was the enabler, the silent partner in the firm of misery, and in some ways his passivity was worse than her aggression because he knew better. He saw the hurt in his grandchildren's eyes, and he chose his own comfort over their protection. Christmas Eve dinner was the breaking point where the tension finally boiled over into something palpable. My mother had prepared a lavish meal, a roast with all the trimmings, but she had set the table with her grandmother's antique china and heavy silver, a setup that was wildly inappropriate for young children. Sarah and I spent the entire meal on edge, hovering over the kids, cutting their meat, catching dripping gravy, terrified that a spill would result in a catastrophe. The conflict started started over something so trivial it seems insane in retrospect. Green beans. My mother had made green beans with almonds, and Leo, being 6, politely said he didn't like the nuts and tried to pick them off. My mother stopped eating, her fork clattering onto the porcelain, and stared at him with a cold, dead look. She told him that in this house, we eat what is served, that picking at food was an insult to the chef, and that he was acting like a spoiled little prince. When I tried to intervene, saying it was fine and he ate the beans, just not the almonds, she turned on me, accusing me of coddling him, of raising soft, disrespectful men who would never survive in the real world. She declared that dinner was over, clearing the plates before anyone was finished, leaving the kids hungry and confused, sending them to bed without the promised cookies and cocoa because treats are for children who behave. The night before Christmas is supposed to be filled with anticipation and magic, but in that house, it was filled with a suffocating silence and the hushed whispers of Sarah and me debating whether to leave right then and there. We decided to stay, clinging to the hope of the morning, clinging to the promise my father had made about spoiling them. We thought that the dinner incident was the price of admission, the pound of flesh we had to pay to get to the joy. We woke up early on Christmas morning, the sun barely cresting the horizon, the house cold and still. We got the kids dressed in their matching pajamas, hyping them up, trying to inject some artificial enthusiasm into the air, telling them that Santa had surely come, and that Grandma and Grandpa were just grumpy because they were old, trying to shield them from the toxicity. We walked down the grand staircase, the smell of pine and stale wood smoke in the air, and entered the living room. The sight that greeted us was admittedly breathtaking. The tree was massive, glittering with expensive glass ornaments, and underneath it was a mountain of wrapped gifts, piles of silver and gold paper that reached halfway up the branches. The kids gasped, their eyes widening, their earlier fear forgotten in the face of such abundance. My mother and father were already there, sitting on the velvet sofa, holding mugs of coffee, watching us enter. My mother didn't say, "Merry Christmas." She just took a sip of her coffee and watched the kids run toward the tree, stopping just short of the pile as they had been trained to do. They looked for their names. They circled the tree, reading tags, looking for the familiar scrawl of Santa or their own names. But as the seconds ticked by, their excitement turned to confusion. They looked at the big boxes, the medium boxes, the small boxes. To Richard, from Santa. To Beatrice, from Santa. To the house. There was nothing for them. Not a single box, not a stocking. Leo looked at me, his lip trembling, and then he looked at his grandmother. He asked the question that hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "Grandma, where are our gifts? Did Santa forget us?" The room went so quiet you could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I looked at my mother, waiting for the reveal, waiting for her to pull out a hidden sack, waiting for the joke to end. But she didn't move. She just smiled, a tight, sharp expression that didn't reach her eyes, and let out a short, barking laugh. "Well," she said, her voice smooth and conversational, as if she were commenting on the weather, "Santa doesn't bring presents to ungrateful children." She took another sip of coffee. "We watched you all week. We watched you track dirt in the hall. We watched you pick almonds off your plate after I slaved over dinner. We watched you run when you were told to walk. Santa sees everything, remember? And he saw that you two simply don't deserve rewards this year. Maybe next year if you learn some manners." I felt the blood drain from my face, a physical sensation of shock so profound it made me dizzy. Sarah let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob, and dropped to her knees to hug the kids, who had dissolved into silent, devastating tears. I looked at my father. He was looking at his coffee cup, studying the steam, refusing to meet my eyes. He knew. He had known the whole time. He had let us drive 3 hours, let us hope, let us endure, just to stage this cruel lesson in obedience. The rage that overtook me then was not hot. It was cold, absolute, and terrifyingly clear. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I walked over to the tree, picked up the largest box, one labeled for my mother, and walked to the fireplace. "David, what are you doing?" My mother snapped, her composure cracking for the first time. "Put that down. You want to talk about gratefulness?" I said, my voice steady, unrecognizable to my own ears. "You invited us here. You promised them a Christmas, and you used them as props in your sick little power play." I threw the box into the fire. It was heavy, and it crushed the logs, sparks flying up into the chimney. My mother screamed, jumping up, but I blocked her path. "We are leaving," I said, "and we are never, ever coming back. You have no grandchildren. You have no son. You have your clean carpets, and your silver, and your miserable, empty life." I turned to Sarah. "Pack the car. Don't fold anything. Just throw it in. We are leaving now." The next 20 minutes were a blur of chaos. My mother followed us up the stairs, screaming that we were ungrateful, that we were ruining Christmas, that we were stealing the joy from the family. She accused me of being violent, of being unstable, gaslighting me in real time as I carried my weeping children out to the car. My father stood on the porch, watching us load the trunk, looking like a ghost. I stopped in front of him before I got in the driver's seat. "You could have stopped this," I told him. "You could have been a grandfather, but you're just her employee." He didn't say a word. He just closed the door. We drove for an hour in silence, the only sound the sniffling of the kids in the back seat. We stopped at a gas station off the highway, a bleak, fluorescent-lit place that smelled of gasoline and old coffee. I bought every candy bar, every bag of chips, every cheap plastic toy they had on the shelf. We sat in the car and ate junk food for Christmas breakfast, telling the kids that Santa had gotten confused, that his sleigh had missed the house because Grandma's house was too mean, and that he had left their real presents at home, a lie we would have to scramble to make true with credit cards we couldn't afford to use. The silence from my parents lasted for weeks. No apology, no check-in, just the void. I blocked my mother's number before we even crossed the state line. I left my father's unblocked, a tiny, foolish part of me, hoping that he would wake up, that he would sneak away and call, that he would apologize, but the phone stayed dark. January was the hardest month of my life. The financial hangover of the trip, combined with the scramble to buy late gifts, crushed us. But the emotional toll was heavier. I had to explain to my son why his grandmother hated him. I had to comfort my daughter when she asked if she was bad. We went into a bunker mentality, just the four of us against the world. I worked double shifts. Sarah took on overtime. We rebuilt our lives without the safety net, realizing that the net had actually been a spiderweb all along. Then 7 months later, in the heat of July, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my father. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked at the screen, expecting an apology, expecting a "I'm leaving her," expecting some acknowledgement of the atrocity. The text read, "Mom is really upset that she hasn't seen the kids. She's been crying all week. We expect you to come back for the summer BBQ. It's time to put this behind us and apologize to her. She's willing to forgive you if you make the first move." I stared at the words, reading them over and over, trying to comprehend the sheer, monumental delusion required to type them. They didn't want reconciliation. They didn't want a relationship. They wanted their audience back. They wanted the punching bags to return to the gym. They felt the absence of our submission, and they mistook it for a pause in the negotiation rather than the end of the contract. I didn't reply. I didn't feel the urge to argue, to explain, to list the grievances. I felt a sudden, profound lightness. The cord was cut. I typed 2 words, "Think again," and then I blocked him. Years have passed since that Christmas. We have our own traditions now. We eat pancakes on the floor. We open presents that are wrapped messily. We laugh loud. We make messes. And we never, ever use food or gifts as a weapon. The kids are older now, and they remember that Christmas. But they remember it differently than I do. They remember it as the day Dad stood up to the dragon. They remember it as the day we became free. I hear through the grapevine that my parents are lonely. The big house is quiet. The carpets are clean. The silver is polished, but there is no one there to see it. They sit in their museum, perfectly preserved in their misery, waiting for an apology that will never come, while we are out here, in the mess and the noise, living a life that is actually full. Santa may not bring presents to ungrateful children, but life brings peace to those who have the courage to walk away from the cold. Thanks for reading my story. If you've ever had to cut off family to save your peace, know that the first step is the hardest, but the view from the other side is worth it. Don't forget to like and subscribe.